Okay. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's webinar, Sustainability and Corporate India, The Emerging Picture. I am Akshara Janandan, a coordinator at ISTE-VIT, and it is my pleasure to serve you as your host for this event. The Indian Society for Technical Education is a non-profit technical student chapter in organizing a diverse range of technical events and fostering a strong technical community. Through engaging initiatives such as technical workshops, hackathons, and codathons, we aim to uncover and nurture the hidden talents in students, providing them with the platform to excel and make a landscape. ISTE-VIT organizes Horizon, an annual national technical summit that includes a pan-India hackathon named Technica, along with numerous events and workshops in fields such as web development, machine learning, electronics, IoT, Web3, app development, and competitive coding. Horizon is one of the largest technical fests that draws over
अभी
1,500
सुन रहे हो?
participants and is designed to foster technical excellence.
Okay, fine.
Technica is a highlight of
Is it
Horizon,
working?
featuring a 48-hour hackathon
Okay.
that inspires around 1,000 participants to excel in creating innovative technical solutions to real-world challenges. The hackathon covers diverse areas including education, fintech, artificial intelligence, hardware, and open innovation. Today, we are honored to have Mr. Anveshi Gutta with us. He is a Chief Executive Officer of AtQuest Sustainable Solutions and is a distinguished TEDx speaker, renowned both in Asia and globally for his leadership. With over 2 decades of industrial experience at PwC, IBM, and HP, Mr. Anveshi also serves on the technical committee at the ESG Exchange. His numerous accolades include being named APAC Insider's South Asia winner in 2022 and 2023, Asia Business Outlook's Top 10 in Asia, and Everest Group's Peak Matrix honoree. Additionally, LinkedIn recognizes him as a top voice on corporate sustainability. Sir brings unparalleled insights into India's sustainability journey, corporate progress in sustainable practices, and future strategic directions. This event provides a pivotal opportunity to engage in shaping a sustainable future for India. Before we proceed, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Mr. Anveshi for joining us in this webinar. We deeply appreciate your willingness to share your expertise and lead discussions on sustainability and business strategies. Your presence significantly enriches our collective learning experience, and we are honored to have you as a guiding influence. Thank you, sir. Now, without further ado, I would like to give a hearty welcome and invite our distinguished speaker to the virtual stage. Sir, the stage is all yours.
Thanks, Akshara. Thank you. I believe I'll be able to share the screen and get started. Let me try doing that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, let me do this. Tell me if you're seeing the screen. And before
Yes,
I
that's
move there,
visible.
you are right. Okay, cool. So I'm going to just keep the video off so that the bandwidth doesn't eat up. And yeah, here we are back again. The slideshow is on full screen mode. Is that correct, Akshara?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Right, thank you. Good evening again. I know we have to kind of look at the clock as we move forward, so that you don't stay out here for too long, because some of you may surely be wanting to watch India win the match against England. So we will try to do as best as we can on the time front. Having said that, the conversation, like Akshara was mentioning, is about sustainability and corporate India. Now, the word sustainability has its many connotations, let's say, and I'm hoping that you folks have heard of sustainability, at least in the context of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is what I believe is far more familiar with a lot of us. So, if that is something you're familiar with, we will narrow it down from there into what is relevant in the corporate context, and further down, narrow it down into the Indian corporate context. So, we'll take that approach over the next few minutes. While I do that, just be aware that the sustainability in the corporate context is all about a very delicate balance between keeping your economic metrics, which is your profit and revenues and everything in picture, while you're also making sure that you're not having irregularities when it comes to how your work is affecting everything on the planet. So it's about being responsible as well, while you're also making sure that you are doing good revenues and profits. So that's the balance we're trying to strike as a corporate, and that's exactly why the depiction on the screen is all about balance. So if we can crack that right, that's what the corporates would be ideally looking for. So with that said, let's move into the agenda. We will introduce sustainability and ESG. We will have a few details about what are the different interpretations of sustainability and the three-letter acronym, which is ESG. We will get into those details. What do they mean? What do they encompass? Everything around that. Then we will have the conversation around India sustainability story. What does India as a country wanting to do on the sustainability front? Because whatever happens with corporate context in India will, of course, have to have its roots with what India as a nation wants to achieve as well. So we have to really understand that bit to an extent. And then we move into the corporate India context. And then we've also, in that whole conversation, get to a point where we would want to understand what is this professional career space in sustainability looking like for graduates and postgraduates that will come out of the universities, like you folks anyways will. Now jumping into the sustainability and ESG. What does sustainability really mean? So this is a Google screenshot of what I see when I say sustainability meaning on Google. If you look at what's highlighted at the bottom, it says ability to be maintained at a certain rate or level. That's as simple as it is. It's about keeping things as much as possible at that level of equilibrium, so to say. That's what sustainability is. But then when you talk of sustainability in the context of the conversations like the one we are having, it takes a little more deeper meaning. It could, like it's highlighted in the green, go to the point of saying it's avoidance of depletion of natural resources in order to maintain an ecological balance. Now, we're specifically talking of an ecological balance in the context of this second highlighted item there. The point being that sustainability, of course, if there was no conversation about it till about 10 years back, there was no sustainable development goals. There was not so much of a conversation on sustainability like it's happening over the last 4 or 5 years. People would have typically considered the first highlight to be what it is. But then it seems to be getting a lot more aligned with the ecological balance as we speak today. So that's something you got to be aware of. Now, with that said, what it means depends on the context in which it is used. In the corporate context, references to sustainability should be a lot more holistic. What do I mean by holistic? Let's look at this. It could mean the fact that you want to sustain your finances in an equilibrium. It could also mean you want to keep your reputation in a certain sense in equilibrium, because you don't want bad uh, media highlights on your company. So you also would want to have your organization's own culture to be sustained the way it is, and so on and so forth in terms of everything else that you see here. So it's about relationships, it's about services and products that you put out there, it's about compliance and everything else. So if you look at that as one of the subsets, if not the complete picture of a corporate context, then you know that there's a lot that you will have to keep your eyes on to make sure that the sustainability of the overall corporate entity is maintained well. Now, in that sense, if you look at this and then you move forward into a little more breakdown, a breakdown on the lines of environmental, social, and governance. Now, environmental, very obviously, if you notice the kind of line items that the highlights that you see here, is all about anything that is affecting the surroundings of yours a lot more, in the sense that there's nature that's getting affected, there's water levels that's getting affected, there's climate that's getting affected, there's a lot of waste and pollution that you see around, there's natural resources that you are tapping into as we speak. So all of that is something we need to be keeping an eye on, and that is important as an aspect of environmental, which is the E in the ESG. The S in the ESG is the social. The social being the fact that you have to also understand that there's human lives that we are talking about in this context, in the sense that there's also a lot of people that are getting affected by your operations, whether it's as a consumer who's getting affected, whether it is your employees who are getting affected because of your approach to diversity and inclusion, whether it is some of the human right aspects of people in and around your facilities that are getting affected, or in the supply chain and everything under it. So from data protection to employment standards to health safety, all of these are important aspects for us to be considering equally, along with the environment is social. Then comes the governance, which has been around for a good long time. So it's been around in the sense that companies have always had a imposition of sorts from regulatory authorities to make sure that they are not erring on the wrong side of law. So at minimum, we are talking about compliance to the law of the land. So if you look at the kind of aspects that you see here, from leadership and corporate governance to bribery and sanctions to financial crime and everything, you're talking about, first things first, being on the right side of the legal requirement of the land. At the same time, you also have to keep an eye on your leadership, the executive, like it's called, and how are you paying them? Is this being transparent? Are you being transparent about the salaries that your executive leadership is getting? So there are times, I don't know if you have observed in the news, but there are times when it gets published when a particular CXO earns a salary that is exorbitantly different from the money that, or the revenue that, the profit that the company is making. So then it catches attention. In this case, of course, the wrong kind of attention, and then of course it's a question mark on the governance practices in that sense. Shareholders, risks and compliances, all of these come under governance. So if you look at that broad 3-pillar approach of ESG, and you connect it back to the slide that we just passed by, which is the different aspects of a corporate sustainability, this is what you arrive at. What I'm trying to make sure you get a sense of is that in a typical corporate context, your touch points of E, S, and G could come up in different contexts, whether it's in the financial context or whether it's in the products and services manufacturing context, or in terms of people and human. Each of those have a different E, S, G touch point, and that's the kind of impression I want you to gather here. So when you look at so far to the point that we've come to, you got to definitely appreciate that sustainability in the corporate context is far more dimensional, multidimensional, unidimensional. You cannot say it is a department in the organization. It's something that cuts through. Like humans, when you say you're talking about sustainability in the HR, finances is sustainability in the finance department. When you talk of products and services, you're talking about sustainability in the operations of your company, and so on and so forth. Compliance will be the legal department, and that is how reputation is your marketing department. So you got to really keep an eye on multiple aspects of sustainability as it applies to different departments in the organization. That's the nutshell of what sustainability means, plus how it ties into the ESG picture. Now, let's get to the India sustainability story. I hope many of you would have already heard of a declaration that was made by India around the net zero commitment. Now, that becomes important because India is looking to go net zero on its emissions by 2070. That's the year they've chosen, which is, of course, like you would have done your math by now, easily another 45 years thereabouts from now. Now, the point with that long an ambition is because of the fact that India is still at a juncture where it is economically growing. It is not a developed nation, but we've heard enough about how we are growing in terms of our economy year after year. And so there is a clear trajectory that we are trying to chart on the growth front. When you have that trajectory on the growth front and you do not yet have everything under the sun sorted on the larger impact of sustainability, then you would want to take some time to kind of get to that net zero point. So India declared a net zero by 2070. There are other countries who have gone with 2050. European Union has gone with 2050 as their net zero year. China has gone with 2060. So there's so on and so forth. So every country has taken a target year. So you would have by now realized India has played it safer by calling out 2070. But having done that, in the meanwhile, they've already started acting on a bunch of different ambitions and missions. The first one that I'm highlighting here is this thing called the International Solar Alliance. And then there's one about the green hydrogen mission. I'll get to the details of it in the next slides. The basic sense is that the Solar Alliance is about countries coming together and cooperating, coordinating, working together on renewable solar energy to manage their requirements of electricity in their own regions. Green hydrogen mission is about positioning an alternative to coal and oil and gas based fuels, so that the industry can use something that is far more greener. That's green hydrogen. Then there is something called Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report. This happened to come about 2 years back, and this is where a lot of companies are being asked to now publish along with their annual report. This is what is called the BRSR report. So you have seen possibly companies that publish their reports annually, saying this is what we've done during the year, this is how we are growing, this is how our profits are, etc. Now, along with that annual report, they're expected to publish the sustainability report, or what is also called the BRSR report. We'll talk about that as well. And then there's the life mission. Now, this is for you, me, all of us as individuals. The life mission, it is lifestyle for environment. LIFE stands for lifestyle for environment. It's a mission that's launched by India, but meant to be adopted across the globe. The intent is to make every individual somebody who's pro planet, right? That's the word they use. They want to make sure that every individual out there is having his or her own lifestyle aligned with the planet's needs. And that's because we also realize that we are unfortunately facing an emergency with climate change bothering us pretty much every other week, if not every other day, because of events that happen, and we notice things that don't fall according to plan. Just as recent as this week, we've had north of India battling a heat wave. We've also had instances where there have been floods in the European region. I think Switzerland has experienced floods last week, and things of that nature. So we've got to also look at that larger picture and see what we as individuals can do. And that's the intent of the life mission. So net zero by 2070. So India has published what is called a long-term low carbon development strategy. Long-term low carbon development strategy, which is essentially a way for India to transit from its current way of work to what it's calling a low carbon way of work. So it's also called, in other words, a transition from a brown economy to a green economy. So the different things that can happen as part of this transition. First thing is low carbon development of electricity systems. Now we were talking about solar. There's also wind. There's hydel. There's a large amount of impetus these days to go for low carbon development of electricity. At the same time, you need to keep an eye on your transport systems. I don't know if you folks are aware, but IRCTC has already acted significantly on greening its entire rail network. What do I mean by greening its entire rail network? The electricity requirements to operate the train networks in India is all going to be completely green soon. And so IRCTC has already done it. There's a significant push for EVs, although I think there's also other side concerns on the fact that if EVs are so very becoming so very uh, uh, too many in number, are we having the renewable energy to support the charging requirements of those EVs? Otherwise, are we even addressing the problem properly? I can always discuss that in detail. Um, then there's this whole thing about material efficiency in buildings and sustainable urbanization. We all know that our cities are getting denser and denser, packed to the T, and because of which there's a strong need to revisit our urban models and make them more sustainable through some of the technologies that can come out, or some of the planning approaches that can be taken up. Either ways, both of those. And then there's the industrial systems that have to be looked at from a low emission perspective. This is exactly where things like the green hydrogen I was mentioning will come in. I'll again talk about it in a minute, but that's the industrial systems that have to be looked at. Then, apart from all of these that we just spoke about, unfortunate truth is that we have already had enough of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases enter the atmosphere. What happens with them entering the atmosphere? Unfortunately, they act as a trapping layer. What I mean by a trapping layer is that they don't let heat get reflected from the Earth's surface and go back to the atmosphere. They just hold it back there in the lower layers of the atmosphere. And because of that happening, phenomenon of global warming that we experience. So, if there is enough and more carbon dioxide and methane that we have already, because of the industrialization era, we have already seen that happen in terms of emissions. How do you address that existing problem? And that is where things like carbon dioxide removal and artificial methods of direct air capture come into picture. So there is that as well in the India strategy. Then there's the natural approach of increasing forest and vegetative cover, because that's something we all have heard enough. More trees is less carbon dioxide in the air, and that's the approach that we are talking about. So how can we have more of nature-based solutions? Then there's this whole thing about how do you support the financial aspects of this whole development, because none of these that we're talking about is possible if there's no money to run these kind of projects. And let's also understand that there's no one who's ready to do long term charity. This is all a long term plan, right? If you look at it, it could be a one time intervention, but if you look at the long term requirement, you need something that's more sustainable in terms of the financial support. And that's the other aspect of the entire strategy we're talking about. Then there's the research and innovation to build new solutions, to come out with new innovative products, etc., to make sure that everything that we spoke of so far is supported well with new age technologies and solutions. Then, like I was mentioning a while back, we've unfortunately had a situation where there's enough and more carbon dioxide out there. There's enough and more global warming happening out there. There's enough and more climate emergencies or climate events happening out there, whether it is a flood, whether it is a heat wave, whether it is a drought, whether it is a forest fire. You call it what you may, but at the end of the day, the events are happening, and unfortunately, at the receiving end, happen to be the living beings on the planet. It's not just the human beings, but living beings. And because of that situation that is panning out, there's a strong need for us to build what we call adaptation measures or even resilience measures, so that when that event hits us, the climate event hits us, we are able to adapt to that situation, or even better, respond in a manner that we are not getting affected too much. In the process of doing that, hopefully, we will also have enough and more technologies come out which will also bring down the carbon dioxide levels, and the global warming gets addressed, and then the events also get tapered down. So that's that. And then there's also a mention of how individuals, we were talking of the life mission, can support this whole strategy of 2070. And finally, we are looking for international cooperation on the subject of low carbon transition, and that is also something that will require a lot of support and cooperation between the developed world and the developing world, between what is also called the global north and what is called the global south, of which India is a part. When you see hear this word global south and global north, then global south is referred to the developing world, global north is the developed world. That's the net zero by 2070 strategy. Then we now move on to the Solar Alliance. This is, like I was saying, a program that is about cooperation between countries to get to a point where we are having enough and more reliable solar energy solutions. If you notice the numbers, we are talking about a towards 1,000 strategy, which aims to have 1,000 billion of investments in solar energy solutions by 2030. Well, that's the idea. And by the way, while delivering energy access to how many people? 1,000 million people. And at the same time, installing 1,000 gigawatts of solar capacity. So look at that numbers, and then look at the fact that we want to do it in the next less than 6 years. Then the number of countries, it's 119 countries that are signatories. Just so that we all know, India is the leading country who's started this mission. So India has started the mission, 119 countries have joined it, 99 countries have also supported it by being core members. So that's the nutshell of the entire solar mission. The idea is that 24/7 there is a network that powers the world on through solar energy. The challenge with solar energy, like you would have already known, is that it only is effective, of course, during the day when the sun is out. When the sun is not there, we always have a lull, a drop in solar energy. And so to avoid that, can we create a network of countries that are running on solar, such there is always constantly some solar power being generated somewhere, and it can also be shared between countries. Then comes the whole conversation on green hydrogen. This is about the national green hydrogen mission. Now, the intent with green hydrogen, and I'll just break it down a little more, is to first hydrogen as alternative fuel to coal and oil and gas. Your manufacturing industries like your cement and iron and steel are significantly dependent on these fossil fuels to run their operations. By significant, I mean they are primarily dependent on such fuels. I've mentioned a while back that India is a developing country. We have a lot of economic activity happening. In the context of that, we will see an increased demand for more cement, more iron, and more steel. But does that really mean we'll have more iron, more coal, and more oil and more gas being burnt? Unfortunately, if we don't do anything about it, yes, that is what will happen, and that is exactly where hydrogen is being positioned as an alternative fuel. It's early days. It's been a topic of discussion and topic of exploration, for that matter, for 2 years or 2.5 years now. But more importantly, it is still not at a scale where it has been adopted, but it will happen. That is where the country, the Indian government has come out with the national mission on green hydrogen. What do you mean by green hydrogen? Why is it called green hydrogen? The reason it's called green hydrogen is because to make hydrogen, first of all, the approach that is taken typically is to break water, which is H2O, into its molecules, which is H2 and O2. And so when hydrogen comes out as a molecule from there, that is what you store and that is what you use as a fuel. But to break H2O into its molecules, you need the equipment like the electrolyzers, which run on energy. And for that energy requirement, again, if you were to burn fossils to generate that energy to break water into its molecules and then supply it to the manufacturing industries, we are not making sense there. So instead of that, the approach is to use renewable energy, predominantly solar energy, to kind of power up those electrolyzers to break the H2O into its molecules. And that's the approach we're talking about. So we're talking now about you for that requirement using an associated renewable energy capacity of about 125 gigawatts in the country. And then we are talking of creating new jobs, 6 lakh jobs. Just so that you put that into context, Adani's have announced, I think this was announced about 8-10 months back, or maybe about a year back, $70 billion into the green hydrogen setup that they are doing. Now, that's a huge number. Just about last week, they revisited that number of 70 billion and stepped it up to 100 billion dollars. So now you can always imagine the kind of money that is going into this particular mission, this particular setups on green hydrogen. I'm just taking Adani's as an example, but there's enough and more private sector and public sector enterprises that are pushing a lot for large scale green hydrogen production. So keep an eye on that if you're interested to kind of look at that as your interest area. Then there's this whole life mission where you talk of individual behaviors. It's called a Jan Andolan. It is about co-creating, basically co-working and co-creating this whole individual impact towards the larger global goals of sustainability. So we're talking of individual behaviors. We're talking of co-creating new ideas from people across the world, think tanks and international organizations. We're also talking about leveraging local cultures, which is of course ingrained in a lot of countries like India. So household practices, good old household practices that you may have heard from either your parents or from your grandparents for that matter, is what we are now going back to in a certain sense through this particular mission. So leveraging local cultures will a good amount of detail on the Life Mission website. You could look it up. There's 75 indicators that they have proposed, 75 action items for each individual that they have proposed you can take in your life to contribute towards the Life Mission. You can even enroll yourself, pledge yourself, support the Life Mission on the website. There's a lot of activities that they are facilitating on the website. Do look it up. Now we move into the corporate India and sustainability story. Here you need to kind of keep an eye on the fact that now we are talking about different aspects that are relevant from a typical industry setup. You're talking of energy efficiencies, which is very obviously required, because if you look at our industries today, there is a good chance that there's a lot of age-old infrastructure, plus the whole thought of optimal energy utilization was not on the top of a lot of these companies' minds when they set themselves up. So now is a time to revisit that, to make sure that your infrastructure, your manufacturing facilities, your machinery is not guzzling up energy when they don't need to. That's the idea with that. Now, for that to happen, what will need to happen, of course, is a lot of innovation that needs to come out. So you've got to keep an eye. So as we go through this slide, think about what is it in it for you. By that I mean, if I am telling you energy efficiency, I'm also telling you that there is a need for innovation, need for new solutions to help the corporate setups cut down on their energy use, whether it is through hydrogen, that is an alternate fuel, whether it is through IoT sensors that you can install to keep an eye on energy utilization and then cut it down from there. There are different ways to look at it, and that's the kind of thing you may have to start thinking about. Supply chain readiness. Now, we're talking of the fact that the entire industries in not just in India but beyond India as well has a significant dependence on logistics and supply chains. And so when you look at that as a key segment of the industry, you're talking of a significant amount of emissions that happen because of the way it is operated today. So is the supply chain of your own company ready to go green is the point here. Again, in this context, if you were to put your thinking hats on, you're talking about how do I kind of transition from this whole fossil fuel based fleet to a renewable energy based fleet, to a EV based fleet, to a hydrogen fuel based fleet. But in the process of doing that, can I also ensure that I am not creating a different problem? Like in the case of EVs, the batteries are a problem. The disposal of batteries is a problem. So you have to really look at that as well. So is there somebody who's looking at that as a potential way to sort it out, solve this problem? Then there's the whole thing about sustainable design. So every product out there needs to be designed in a manner that it is having less waste. Ideally, the idea is to be circular, like it shows here, meaning to say you use a product, you buy a product, you use a product, then when you are about to discard a product, you don't really discard, but there should be a way for it to reach the manufacturer of the product again, so that they can at least figure out what they can reuse, what they can recycle, and what they will have to refurbish or remanufacture for that matter. So that's the idea of sustainable design. This requires a lot of thinking and working on waste management principles and circularity principles. So if you wanted to look it up, please do on those lines. Plus, at the same time of all of these happening, we will also have to be aware that the industry will look to have the right people in the organization, in the company, driving these kind of requirements, these kind of projects. And so they are looking at building the right capabilities, the right capacities to deliver to that particular requirement. And that is also where a lot of hiring these days is becoming aligned with this new requirement around sustainability. So I have a slide further on this one, but for you to know that there's increasing requirements like that is popping out of the industry these days. You need to have the right procedures in place. You cannot be a company that has its operations at scale, but doesn't necessarily have the right checks and balances to make sure that you're not you're doing everything thoroughly so in the proper manner. If you do not have those checks and balances, unfortunately, things are ad hoc, things are happening on the fly, and you don't necessarily have a visibility into it. So the right level of procedures and policies, the checks and balances is important. And the last thing that we also need from the industry, of course, is they need to have what we call stewards and vanguards. By stewards, of course, we mean to say somebody who's able to stay put and take guard and take care that everything is being done thoroughly. So that's the kind of a role that a steward would play. Then there's vanguard who's saying, I will kind of be at the forefront. I will not wait for the entire industry to kind of act upon it. Let me step up, let me come forward, let me do things as a leader in the space. So that's the vanguard. So if you can look at that sort of a corporate entity, and if you find some of those entities that are doing something like that, I would say going forward, those are the kind of that are in favor as per a lot of surveys that have been done. So that's in a nutshell focus areas. And while the slide says corporate India's near-term focus, it is so, but I'm just saying globally also it's not very different. So these are still the focus areas from a global context as well. Now, along with all of that comes in what we call sustainability communication and reporting. Now, if you have looked at any company's annual report or financial statements for that matter, you know that the financial data gets reported in a very, very structured way because it's, of course, numbers and numericals. Unfortunately, till about a year and a half back, the whole space of sustainability was not so very quantitative. Now it is getting to a point where everything, pretty much a large majority, I would say, of sustainability related data is becoming quantified. So which means there's enough and more data being objectively, quantitatively tracked and reported. And when it's getting reported and communicated, you will of course have a scenario where you will need the right people to do the data collection, data analysis, etc., and communication, of course. But at the same time, it gives you a new avenue because of the amount of data this is going to be generating. It gives you a new avenue to bring in the whole context of artificial intelligence and machine learning because of a new facet of data, corporate data being available that was not the case earlier. So look at that as another opportunity that is emerging for the careers out there. Then I move forward. Key stakeholder expectations, again from a typical corporate entity. There's an investor who puts money into your company, then he or she will expect one thing. There's a regulator who is the one who's setting up the law of the land, the legal rules, etc. They expect differently. And then there's customers like you and me and whoever else who will have their own expectations of these companies. Investors want to make sure that there's a top line, the bottom line, and the green line are aligned. What do we mean by that? Top line is your revenue, bottom line is your profit, green line is how you're doing on what I was just calling a while back as sustainability related quantitative indicators. So those have to really show up in positive. That is the expectation. There's a strong requirement from investors to have a a good amount of focus on how these whole risks, including the climate change risks, how could it affect you and how are you prepared to address that. When I've mentioned earlier in this conversation something about adaptation and resilience, this is what I meant. Risk management around anything around ESG risks, you need to have the right measures, right methods to adapt to the situation and be resilient to it. Regulators, of course, very obviously will affect you to be able to report in a very effective manner. And at the same time, because of the fact that these regulations in the sustainability space are only evolving, they expect you to be fast-footed or nimble to adapt to the evolving regulations. So when a new regulation comes up, they don't give you enough time to start figuring that out. So you got to be really on your toes at that point. So that's the expectation that the regulators have. And then there's this customer who wants to have a trustworthy and responsible brand that they are transacting with. So if you are buying something from a certain brand, if the brand evokes trust and responsibility for you, there's a stronger chance that you develop a connect with it. And that's the expectation that is coming out from customers. What do I mean by trustworthy and responsible brand? So there's these kind of taboo words when it comes to establishing brand trust. There's something called greenwashing. It's nothing but a form of advertising which is trying to project something that is not so eco-friendly, not so environment-friendly, not so green as a greener option. So as an example, 50% more recycled content than before. If you see this kind of an advertising, what do you make of it? It could mean anything under the sun. More recycled content than before. What if your before was just as low as 2%? When you say 50% more than before, that 2% has become 3%. Does that even count? Is the question you want to ask. So don't be fooled by messages like this, because that's what amounts to greenwashing. Green hushing is a case where a company, having done everything that it is doing on sustainability, is reluctant, is hesitant to put the information out there. They're holding back information on corporate climate targets. They're holding back information on what they have experienced as challenges and best practices, etc. And that's the kind of refusal that is not encouraged, not a great sign for the industry in total. So that's called green hushing. And then there's green wishing, which is to say a scenario where a company hopes to meet. Look at the word, it says hopes to meet certain sustainability commitments, but simply does not have the wherewithal to do so. Does not know if it has the means to do so, but it would have probably declared a net zero target year under pressure. Pressure from whom? Pressure could come from your investors, pressure could come from your regulators, whoever it is. Under pressure, you may just declare a year so that you can just address the problem for now. But when somebody asks you, how are you going to get there in terms of the target, you have no answer. And that's what is called green wishing. So those are the kind of words that you want to stay away from if you are then talking about building trust in your corporate entity. I believe by now you would have had a good sense of how corporates look at sustainability. And now, if you look at that entire picture and extrapolate it into a career in sustainability, here's what you may want to look at. And if you have done this, great. If you've not, LinkedIn publishes what is called a global green skills report. The last one was from last year, 2023. And this is an annual publication where they talk about what sort of green skills are picking up attention, because LinkedIn fortunately has access to a lot of professional conversations plus postings on their platform. Basis that they study the kind of action on the platform and bring up this report. So first thing you will notice is that there's a 12.3% increase of green talent in the workforce between 22 and 23. But at the same time, there's a 22.4% increase in job postings that required a green skill. If you look at that, there's a difference there in the sense that this demand is 22.4% growing, while the supply of skills is only growing at 12.3%. So the kind of skills that they're talking about, by the way, the list you see here is, of course, because LinkedIn publishes this for a global audience, is far more global in nature. But you will see that some of them, like renewable energy, even climate change, energy efficiency, all of these are aspects that will apply in most geographies, including India. So just keep an eye on the Global Green Skills Report is my first suggestion when you are looking at, if at all you're looking at building a green skill career. And before I move any forward, I know that the university has batches that are for different streams, and so if you, whether you're from a computer science stream, whether you're from a mechanical engineering stream or a civil engineering stream or electronics or electrical engineering stream or degree that you are going through, you would definitely see that every stream has a role that they could explore in the whole market around sustainability because of the wide and diverse nature of that particular space. But if you were to further look for resources, I would strongly suggest that one of my learning resources that I always advocate is this thing called the UNCCE Learn. This is a free tool, a free platform for that matter, where you could get a very, very well done, rich material on sustainability and particularly on climate. So you could explore a bunch of different things, and then from there on, you could possibly move your needle towards one of those or couple of those things which are fascinating you. It could be about, like I said, the courses could be about engineering, could be about marketing, could be about even people management, could be about even social sector, etc. So depending on where your interest lies, once you have done this, and these are, like I repeat myself, free courses, you also get a good certificate that is coming from the UN. It's got a good amount of value out there. So look for those to at least get to the nuances, the specifics of sustainability. And then once you explore all, then find your focus in that particular thing. And once you find your focus, you could go deeper and deeper into that subject, either on the same platform or on other platforms that are there. So that's the first thing I would want you to consider as a learning resource. The other learning resource that I am going to put out there is something that I put together for my for my requirements. So I'll probably just sort that out. But the point is, I keep video bites on what is happening in the world out there. What is happening in the world out there in terms of the news, the events, the announcements that are happening on sustainability. Because, like I've been saying a lot of times, there is a lot of action that has happened in the last 2.5 years on this front than it has ever happened in the past. So because of that, the evolution of these different aspects of sustainability is very challenging to keep a grip of, and that is where news articles from different publications and everything is something you need to be on top of. If you have the time to go through them, please go through these news articles. In fact, I published these on my LinkedIn as well. I give you the link to the article. You could go study that, read that, or for that matter, there's a 2-minute video that you could always come back to and watch. So you could always do that. The subscription on YouTube is here. That finally, I think I'll leave that as your last message. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them at this point. Otherwise, like it says here, happy to connect with you offline as well.
Thank you, sir, for your enlightening presentation on sustainability and corporate practices. As for the questions, to our attendees, please feel free to submit your questions to the chat box and we'll address them one by one. To start off, we have the first question from our audience. Is there any solution for storage issue of hydrogen fuel, sir?
Yeah, I mean, this is still something that it is evolving in the sense that there's a lot of fluidity in that whole fuel. Hydrogen is a fluid element. So you would not have a ready solution, but I think it is evolving just as much as the green hydrogen tech is evolving. The storage solutions, the storage and logistical solutions around green hydrogen are still evolving. I wouldn't really pin it down to one. But if you look at the fact that on the automotive side, there's hydrogen cells that are being talked about. So I think to that extent, there's an experiment also going on to see if hydrogen cells could be one of the ways to address that requirement in the automotive space. But larger storage solutions are still being explored.
Okay, so that was a very insightful answer. The second question is, how can we as new graduates contribute to promoting sustainability within Indian corporations, and what skills or knowledge should we focus on to make a meaningful impact?
Just repeat that question to the first half. Within what? Within?
Indian corporations, and what skills or knowledge
Oh,
should we focus on to make a meaningful impact?
yeah. So in terms of skills, I think when I was talking about the last couple of slides, I did hint towards the fact that there's a diverse set of skills that are required. At minimum, what you need to have in your portfolio is a strong stakeholder engagement skill, which means to say the ability to manage different kind of stakeholders, different kind of parties in a conversation that is balanced is important, because the corporate context sustainability includes, like I was had a slide which said investors, it said regulators, it will also have, of course, customers, it will also have employees and everything. So for that balance to be struck, you need to have a way to be on top of the pulse of these different people, different stakeholders. That's one bare minimum. Number two, I would say, is a good sense of data. And because I said a while back again, lot of evolution of new data sets that is happening in this space. And the more it happens, the stronger it will be the need for you to get a sense of the data to make it meaningful, and maybe even apply some things like the artificial intelligence and ML to bring that otherwise wouldn't have been around. Those would be the top two in my mind.
Thank you, sir, for that answer. The next question is, how exactly are the emerging sustainability regulations changing the company goals and positions?
Yeah. So the point is that it's not just about sustainability regulations. Just look at it simply from a regulation perspective. If you know, or for that matter, not just regulation. Let's take a very common day-to-day example. If you are on the road going from your home to your college on a daily basis, and you know that you take a certain route, if the route that you take has a sudden introduction of a one way somewhere in between, then you know that you're disrupted. Your intent to reach the college by 8 o'clock could not happen today because of that sudden pop-up of a one-way. And that is the kind of thing we're talking about. So the more these things happen, the more there will be those let's say tremors in the corporate sustainability space. And so they will have to, of course, accommodate that and realign themselves and readjust themselves. So this whole rewiring will have to be done, and that is the challenge that comes up. Fortunately, while I'm saying there's a lot of new regulations that have come out in the recent past, it barring a couple of them, I would say it hasn't really come to a point where you've shocked the industry. It hasn't really happened that way. So fortunately, it hasn't come to that point. I believe it will be kept so that the industry also doesn't get too fluttered with these things.
Thank you, sir, for that very detailed answer. The next question is, are the companies engaging in green hushing facing any consequences?
Unfortunately, not, because green hushing comes out in the open very, very, very rarely. Why do I say rarely? Because you don't know what is being hushed till it is out in the open. Quite unlike that, if you talk of, let's say, something like greenwashing, I just gave an example of that 50% more than earlier. Now, that is something you could probably do a little math around. In fact, all of you may have come across this just about last month somewhere. There was this program that was launched called, and this was launched by this Instagram influencer called Food Farmer. This guy got popular because of this Bonvita incident that he highlighted. So the point with something like that is that there is a good way for you to study labels and identify where things are being published in an incorrect manner or being misled. Unlike that, with green hushing, it's a challenging aspect to really unearth something that was hushed earlier. Of course, it's not impossible, but it's not as easy as greenwashing. And so the laws of the land haven't yet come to the point where they are kind of taking any penalizing action on green hushing.
Thank you, sir, for that answer. We have one more question. How can universities contribute to these green solutions?
So there are three ways, right? First of all, universities like yours, I'm assuming, will have incubator setups, will have cells where innovations are being promoted. in that context, if you can also consider a particular stream that focuses on these whole aspects of E, S, G, predominantly I would say E for this matter, then I think that is one clear way to do it, where you encourage entrepreneurship, innovation in the space of sustainability. The other way is very obviously what I've seen a few universities do, and I don't know if you folks are doing it, but there is increasing attention to bachelor's and master's courses on sustainability, which support students learning on the topic. Now that requires, of course, to have the right kind of people to come down and do your teaching out there. But that is also being facilitated. Just last year, AICTE and even UGC for that matter, last year they announced what they call professors of practice, which means the universities are now allowed to have industry professionals come in and act as professors for a period of 3 years. Now, these are the kind of incentives that are available to universities to tap into, to build that ecosystem where sustainability learning can be far more accessible to the students that are studying at the university. So that's the two ways that I would say we could do that.
Thank you, sir, for that answer. We have one last question. What trends do you foresee in the sustainability sector over the next decade?
So, in terms of the emphasis that I've laid out on the fact that there's data, I would say data, sustainability data being tapped into for insights is going to be a big one. There's a lot of action already happening there because of the realization that is already there, including big names like Microsoft's and Google's are doing a lot of work on that. At the same time, apart from the whole conversation on data, there will of course be a requirement to come up with skills to avoid what we saw as greenwashing, green hushing, etc. Because that will mean you need to have third-party checks in place to make sure that that is something that doesn't happen. And finally, in terms of innovations, I would say there's a significant need for innovations to address the whole carbon emissions that we've been talking about, whether it is carbon emissions that have already happened or carbon emissions that are waiting to happen. So the kind of terminologies that you may want to look up on is climate tech, clean tech, green tech, social technologies, tech for good. All of these are things that you should look up on, and then I believe you will get a sense of the innovations in the ecosystem that are coming up on this front. So broadly, I think those would be the three angles in which I would suggest you explore that.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir, for sharing your invaluable insights with all the answers you have given. We come to the end of the session, and your presentation on sustainability and corporate practices in India has been incredibly enlightening. Your insights on India's sustainability journey and the role of ESG in shaping business strategies were particularly thought provoking. Appreciate your time and expertise. This webinar has been a significant learning experience for all the participants. And as for the audience, I extend my gratitude to everyone for their active engagement, which has made this event a huge success. I request everyone to please take a moment to complete the feedback and attendance forms, the links for which will be shared in the chat box shortly. Be sure to stay connected with us on our social media channels. You can find the link in the description box below. Once again, thank you, sir, and thanks to everyone for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you, sir.
Bye.
हो गया ये इसको ये